What does it look like when a child's mind refuses to accept death? Yuta Okkotsu from Jujutsu Kaisen presents as one of anime's most powerful sorcerers, but beneath that power lies something far more psychologically disturbing. A textbook manifestation of grief so complicated, so unprocessed, that it literally warped reality around him. His cursed spirit, Rika, isn't simply supernatural spectacle. She's the externalized architecture of a psyche that chose psychological fracture over accepting unbearable loss. Today we're examining the dark psychology of attachment gone catastrophically wrong, how childhood trauma can arrest development for years, and why Yuta's story represents one of the most clinically accurate portrayals of complicated grief in modern fiction. Watch Yuta carefully when we first encounter him. He's not presenting as a hero or even a functional adolescent. He's exhibiting severe social withdrawal, active suicidal ideation, and what Martin Seligman termed learned helplessness, a psychological state where individuals become so conditioned to negative outcomes that they stop attempting to change circumstances. His opening desire to die isn't adolescent melodrama. It's a genuine death wish rooted in profound guilt and the conviction that his existence causes harm to others. This guilt complex reveals something crucial about his cognitive architecture. His internal locus of control has warped into personalization, one of the fundamental thinking errors in Aaron Beck's cognitive model of depression. He believes he's responsible for every negative outcome around him, every injury, every curse manifestation, every moment of suffering. This isn't humility. It's a cognitive distortion so severe it's become his organizing principle. His relationship with Rika demands examination through attachment theory, the framework John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth developed to explain how early bonds shape psychological development. In childhood, Yuta formed what researchers would classify as secure attachment with Rika. They provided each other emotional safety, consistent availability, and mutual comfort. When Rika died traumatically in front of him, Yuta's developing brain confronted a rupture it couldn't process. Attachment theory demonstrates that children require consistent, reliable attachment figures to develop healthy emotional regulation. When that attachment is violently severed during critical developmental periods, the psychological consequences can be catastrophic. But Yuta's mind didn't just experience trauma, it refused to complete the narrative. Instead of moving through grief's normal stages, denial through anger to eventual acceptance, his psyche did something remarkable and terrifying. It refused to accept the loss entirely. This brings us to what Sigmund Freud distinguished as melancholia versus mourning. In healthy grief, the ego gradually withdraws attachment to the lost object and becomes free to form new connections. In melancholia, the ego identifies with the lost object so completely that losing the object feels like losing part of the self. Yuta didn't just grieve Rika, he psychologically fused with her, unable to distinguish between his identity and his memory of her. The curse Rika became represents quite literally an externalization of Yuta's inability to internalize and process loss. His unconscious mind, employing what Freud called defense mechanisms, constructed an elaborate psychological prison where Rika never truly died because acknowledging her death meant confronting reality too painful to survive. This wasn't conscious choice. It was psychological necessity, the mind protecting itself the only way it knew how. Carl Jung's shadow concept illuminates what Rika's curse actually represents in Yuta's psychological architecture. The shadow contains unconscious personality aspects the conscious ego doesn't identify with, often housing repressed qualities, impulses, and emotions. Rika's curse is Yuta's shadow made manifest, all his repressed rage at the universe for taking her, his guilt for surviving when she didn't, his desperate need for connection warring with terror of abandonment, and paradoxically, his immense power that he's too frightened to acknowledge as his own. Jung believed psychological wholeness required shadow integration, and Yuta's entire arc in Jujutsu Kaisen 0 is essentially shadow work, the difficult process of acknowledging and accepting darker aspects of ourselves. When he finally confronts the truth that he cursed Rika, rather than being cursed by her, He's performing the psychological labor of reclaiming projection, recognizing that what he feared as external threat was actually internal wound. Consider the developmental timing of Rika's death. Erik Erikson identified ages 6 through 12 as the industry versus inferiority stage, when children develop competence and begin feeling proud of accomplishments. Rika's death during this critical period meant that instead of developing healthy self-esteem and social skills, Yuta's psychological development became arrested at this juncture. He internalized the catastrophic belief that his very existence was dangerous, that his love literally killed people. This became what cognitive psychologists call a core belief, a fundamental assumption about self, others, and world that shapes all subsequent experiences. Yuta's core belief crystallized as, "I am dangerous and cause harm to those I love," generating automatic negative thoughts and avoidance behaviors that defined his adolescence. This wasn't logical conclusion from evidence. It was psychological scar tissue forming over a wound too deep to heal properly. Trauma psychology, particularly Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's research on how trauma affects developing brains, explains much of Yuta's presentation. Van der Kolk demonstrated that traumatic experiences, especially in childhood, fundamentally alter brain structure and function, particularly in regions responsible for emotional regulation, memory processing, and threat detection. Yuta's hypervigilance, his constant awareness that Rika might hurt others, mirrors the heightened threat response characterizing post-traumatic stress disorder. His social withdrawal represents what trauma specialists call hypoarousal, a shutdown response where the nervous system becomes so overwhelmed it essentially disconnects to protect itself. The fact that Yuta's curse responds automatically to threats against him suggests trauma has created an oversensitized alarm system where his unconscious perceives danger everywhere and responds with overwhelming force before conscious awareness even registers the threat. What makes Yuta's psychology particularly compelling is how precisely it illustrates complicated grief, a term psychiatrist M. Catherine Shear coined to describe grief when normal healing processes are disrupted. The bereaved person becomes stuck in intense mourning that doesn't improve with time. Research demonstrates that complicated grief can persist for years and associates with significant impairment in social and occupational functioning, exactly what we observe with Yuta. He can't form new relationships because psychologically he never released his relationship with Rika. His suicidal ideation isn't simply depression. It's what grief researchers call yearning for reunion, taken to its logical extreme. If life without Rika is unbearable, death becomes appealing not as escape from pain, but as pathway to rejoining the lost attachment figure. This isn't weakness. It's the mind following its own logic to devastating conclusions. His relationship with Maki Zenin becomes psychologically significant as his first attempt to form new attachment bonds since Rika's death. Attachment researchers recognize this as crucial healing, the ability to trust again, to invest emotionally in new relationships despite risk of future loss. Maki's psychological profile, her defensive independence and rejection of traditional social bonds actually makes her a psychologically safe choice for Yuta, because she doesn't demand the kind of intimate emotional vulnerability that terrifies him. Their dynamic allows him to practice attachment behaviors in controlled ways, gradually rebuilding his capacity for human connection without overwhelming his still fragile psychological defenses. She doesn't replace Rika. She creates space for Yuta to discover he can care for someone new without betraying someone lost. Satoru Gojo's role in Yuta's psychological recovery cannot be understated. From therapeutic perspectives, Gojo functions as what psychologists call a corrective emotional experience, a relationship contradicting and healing previous negative relational patterns. Gojo provides unconditional positive regard, Carl Rogers' term for accepting someone completely regardless of their flaws or dangers. This acceptance is psychologically transformative because it challenges Yuta's core belief about being fundamentally unacceptable. Gojo also models something crucial: power without guilt. He demonstrates that being strong doesn't make you monstrous, that your capabilities don't define your character. This reframing helps Yuta begin separating his sense of self from his sense of danger, cognitive restructuring that's essential for healing. Gojo doesn't fix Yuta. He creates conditions where Yuta can begin fixing himself. When Yuta eventually releases Rika, we're witnessing what trauma therapists call processing the traumatic memory. For years, Yuta's memory of Rika's death remained frozen in time, unintegrated and unprocessed. His curse kept her in perpetual undeath because his mind couldn't bear completing the narrative, acknowledging she died, that she's gone, that he must continue living without her. The climactic moment where he thanks her and says goodbye represents completion of what psychologists call grief work, the psychological process of adjusting to loss, finding meaning in it, and reinvesting in life. His tears aren't just sadness, they're what researchers term adaptive grieving, the healthy emotional release allowing reorganization of attachment bonds. He's not forgetting Rika. He's finally allowing her to be dead, allowing himself to be alive, allowing both of them to stop existing in the psychological limbo his trauma created. There's profound truth here about what Jung called enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually transforms into its opposite. Yuta's greatest weakness, his inability to let go, literally became his greatest strength through Rika's curse manifestation. But simultaneously, his greatest strength became his greatest prison. This paradox reflects deep psychological reality. Our coping mechanisms, the very things helping us survive trauma, often become obstacles to thriving. The psychological defenses protecting young Yuta from unbearable grief became the curse isolating him from life itself. His healing required dismantling the very protection that had kept him psychologically intact. This is the terrible bargain trauma survivors face. The walls that kept you safe must eventually come down if you want to live rather than merely survive. From clinical perspectives, evaluating Yuta using DSM-5 criteria might suggest persistent complex bereavement disorder, major depressive disorder with suicidal ideation, possibly post-traumatic stress disorder. However, distinguishing between traumatic symptoms and clinical disorder matters here. Yuta exhibits trauma responses, but within his supernatural realities context, some responses are actually adaptive rather than pathological. This raises fascinating questions about how we define mental health across different contexts and realities. Is his manifestation of Rika a symptom of disorder or a functional adaptation to circumstances most people never face? The answer matters less than understanding the psychological mechanisms operating beneath the surface. What Yuta Okkotsu teaches us about human psychology extends far beyond anime analysis. His story illustrates how minds protect themselves from unbearable pain through elaborate psychological gymnastics, how grief can literally reshape identity, and how healing requires confronting the very truths we've built entire psychological architectures to avoid. His journey demonstrates that strength isn't found in never being broken. It's found in having courage to acknowledge our brokenness, to feel the pain we've been avoiding, and to trust that we can survive what we thought would destroy us. The fact that Yuta resonates deeply with audiences suggests many viewers recognize something of their own psychological struggles in his character. The fear of being too much, too dangerous, too broken to be loved, the desperate attempt to hold on to what we've lost, the terror of moving forward because it feels like betrayal of those who can't come with us. In Yuta, we observe a profound psychological truth. Love and trauma, attachment and loss, strength and vulnerability aren't opposites, but deeply intertwined aspects of human experience. His curse was never really about Rika. It was about a child's mind doing whatever it took to survive unbearable loss, and a young man's journey to finally, painfully, beautifully letting that child rest. That's the dark psychology of Yuta Okkotsu. Sometimes our survival mechanisms become our prisons, and freedom requires courage to feel everything we've been running from. Healing doesn't erase the wound. It integrates the wound into a self that can carry it without being defined by it. That's the difference between Yuta at the beginning and Yuta at the end. Not that the wound disappeared, but that he learned to live as something more than just wounded. If this psychological analysis resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. For more examinations of character psychology in anime, drop a comment below telling me which character you'd like analyzed next and whether you think Yuta's psychology accurately reflects real trauma responses. Remember, Understanding fictional psychology helps us understand real human complexity, and that understanding is the first step toward compassion, both for others and for ourselves.